Dan, this is Steve, this is Process Potables. We're doing a little extra bonus content. We just wrapped up the podcast here at Eat Sam Brewery in Woodbury. Went really well. Did an interview with Andy, who is a supervisor here, who was nice enough to come on, also a Sixers season ticket holder. We talked some Eat and Sam, their history, about the beers, about the venue, things they have coming up and in the works, stuff like that. It was a very good conversation. You can check that out on the pod. We asked that everybody please subscribe to the pod, give us a 5-star rating, leave a review, everything like that, and follow us on all our social media with Instagram, Twitter, and Untapped. We'll be checking in all the beers we've had today on Untapped and things like that. Our handle on everything is at Process Potables. So please follow us on all of that. You want to go down the list of everything we drank here today?
Sure.
And which one did you like the most? I'll tell you, I've had this beer is Poison, the sour.
Yeah.
The Chai Pounder and English Mild Ale. The Bad Hombre, the Milk Stout with kick, with the chili, the cinnamon, the vanilla, the cold brew coffee. I had the Swing Nose, the New England IPA, the Parlor Car, which is a Brut IPA, the American Dino Sour, and the Test Track, which right now is a Belgian triple. I definitely think that my favorite is what I'm drinking now, which is the double IPA. This is the Space Force double IPA, an 8% ABV, New England style double IPA with Galaxy hops, flavors of pineapple, soft peach, and citrus. I think this is my favorite.
Yeah, this is definitely one of my favorites too. We kind of have a little overlap. I had, the Monkey and the Engineer, which is a Hefe Weizen. I had the Coffee Porter, which is I'm pretty sure they have that beer here all the time. I think that's like
that was the first beer I ever had here.
Yeah, it's really solid. I know it's my wife's favorite. The next one was this beer is Poison, that sour. I think that might be my favorite one out of everything, just because sours with me are just really hit or miss. I've had some sours I have are just some of the best beers ever, and then it always seems like when they're not, they're either the worst.
I mean, they often have like some kind of fruit flavor to them, I feel.
Right.
So it's whether you like that fruit or not, typically, and that flavoring. Because there's no beer that's just like, hey, this is sour and that's it. Like, it's always something. It's always like got some kind of fruit flavor or different kinds of hops. So it's going to depend on what your preferences are.
It's either that or sometimes they're just not sour enough. But this one just had like the perfect amount of bite to it. I don't know how else to describe it with a really good sour beer. Sometimes it just has that right level of flavor and sourness.
Well, so I can tell you, I don't know if this applies to you as well, but like I'm not a big Saison guy, and Saisons tend to be like borderline sour, but they're not actually sours, and that's why I think I don't like them. And I prefer just beers that are actually categorized as sour, because when you're close but not there, I'm like, well, what the fuck, dude? Like, just be sour. Like, just do it.
Be sour or be nothing.
Right. So I kind of agree with you.
Yeah, then we had the Bad Hombre, which is a reoccurring beer on the podcast.
Absolutely.
This double IPA, which we're drinking now, the Les Belges, or however you pronounce it, the Belgian, pretty good.
I'm not commenting on that again.
The American Dino Sour, which was the other sour beer. And then I had a Test Track as well, which was pretty good. So, between the both of us, the double IPA and the beers Poison, definitely our favorites.
So we briefly discussed Game 7 on the podcast. It's been a couple days. We've had the chance to kind of settle and reflect. Obviously heartbreaking. Obviously one goes into the lore of disappointing Philly sporting events. We break down some of the other ones and where this kind of falls in, and ultimately how the future of the Sixers is going to impact how we really remember that event. Right now we really can't grasp the full scope of it until we know what's to come of this franchise. So we talk about that on the pod, and we kind of go player by player as far as guys who their status as Sixers is up in the air. And we break them down. We go through Jimmy, Tobias, JJ, all the way to Boban, James Ennis, TJ, things like that. As the only 4 players that are actually under contract and most likely going to be here are Zaire Smith, Jonah Bolden, Joel Embiid, and Ben Simmons.
Yep.
So we talk about that. One thing that we want to talk to everybody about that I feel like we didn't really get the chance to on the podcast is all this Brett Brown talk, all the reports that came out one by one, and how we ultimately feel about that now, a couple days removed from the chaos of it all and knowing that Brett's going to be back. So Obviously, it came out before Game 7 from Mark Stein of the New York Times that he was apparently told by a source that Brett Brown was essentially coaching for his job in that Game 7 and that a second-round exit was going to cost him his job. Obviously, as we discussed, the Sixers lost Game 7 on that Kawhi ridiculous, science-defying shot.
Yeah.
We don't need to delve on that anymore.
Nope.
And then Woj came out and reported that Brett Brown's job was actually safe. I believe the following day, on Monday, it was already confirmed that Brett would be back, that there was no issues via ownership. And then Mark Stein came back and basically apologized and said, you know, it was bad information, like he was wrong. And, like, credit to him for owning that, but also, like, fucking bullshit that you don't... A guy of that prominence, and, like, Mark Stein does a good job. I don't dislike Mark Stein.
Right.
I think he does a good job. I think you talk about, like, Woj and Shams, and they're, like, the guys, but, like, Mark Stein is pretty close. He's, like, that
and he's
second
been around
tier.
for a long time.
He's been around a long time. Like, obviously, the New York Times is no joke. Like, it's a pretty big deal to be the guy for the New York Times. I feel like he generally gets it right. Everybody has their misses, so I don't want to kill the guy, but it seemed like really bad timing to put that information out at that time. I've even seen people, you know, having theories around, did the Sixers want that out there? Did Brett Brown want that out there? Was this all like meant to be motivation for people and whatever? And while I think that that's crazy and absolutely not the case, the rallying cry by the players after the Game 7 loss to Brett Brown's defense really kind of made me think that there could be a reality to that in some regards.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't think it was the case,
Right.
but it makes sense. Is really what I'm trying to say. I don't have a necessary problem with it because it was very heartening, enlightening, things of that nature to hear all the players the next day defend Brett Brown. Jimmy Butler defended him, who we know as soon as he got here seemed to have his kind of flare-ups
Right.
with Brett. There was that talk about when they were watching film that he
was
raised
out
his
speaking,
voice
yeah.
and went out on everything. And Brett squashed that, and Brett said that he welcomes that. And as the season progressed, it felt like that relationship got better. We had the quotes from Joel Embiid where Joel said, hey, if anybody's to blame for this, it's me. Like, I didn't step up. I talk about being a dominant player. I didn't do that. Like, I love Brett. We've said on the podcast before, and I think that this comes all the more to fruition when talking about this upcoming summer and the state of, like, flux this team is in, that I think it's very important to note that I believe that Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons both have very vested interest in Brett Brown and care for him very much, and there needs to be priority put on the fact that your two biggest stars and your two most important players like this coach, respect this coach, and want him to be here. And I think there could be a significant issue with both of them if you were to get rid of him.
Exactly, and well, let's go back a little bit. I guess if there's one good thing about the whole Mark Stein report is that he can become the Mike Lombardi part of Embiid's speech when they do win the championship in a few years, and he's wearing the Mummers outfit. So
He absolutely would do that too.
Exactly. So and when when of all people when Woj reports the opposite, then okay. And if
that's like Woj giving Mark Stein a tombstone pile driver.
Exactly. Yep.
And then he just sticks a tongue out.
Yeah. So and
There's been a lot of wrestling talk on the spot.
and then there's a lot of
Thanks,
people.
Corey.
And then if you're someone who follows the general news and politics and things, a lot of people have their criticisms in the New York Times, so we can go down that avenue, but I don't want to because I'd rather talk basketball and drink beer. But the other thing
You're
too
in the
is-
right place, buddy.
Yeah. So I think the other Brett Brown definitely has his share of criticisms, and a few of them are definitely deserved. We talked about it. But if you were to get Brett Brown, now's not the time. It's not like, and when we keep saying running it back, well, it's like, okay, well, Brett Brown's really coached 3 different teams this past year. So now you're going to get rid of him because in 25 games when he had this nucleus together, it just didn't work. Like no, it's like with the Clippers, and we mentioned this on the podcast, we use them as a comparison for another topic. Year after year, they just couldn't make it to the finals with the Chris Paul, Blake Griffin. Like at that point, I understood it. And instead of getting rid of the coach,
But Doc Rivers is still there.
Yeah, he's still there. Doc Rivers is still there, and they just blew up the team, like, which is fine. But at that point, it's like, okay, we've hit the ceiling with this team, and it's just we don't like the ceiling could even be higher. I mean, obviously, it could be worse. So I mean, this team just has not had enough time together, and we agree. You run it back because after less than half of a season and 2 rounds of the playoffs, that's definitely not a big enough sample size to determine should we fire this guy.
Well, we kind of agree about running it back, and you can listen to the podcast for a little more in depth on that. The last thing I really have on this, and we've addressed this in different aspects and never really put it together, I feel like, but the other thing about Brett Brown that I feel like people don't give credit for is that you have to look at like the NBA. And we talk about like the guys that run this stuff, like they know more than we do. And we like to talk like we know stuff, and we try and do our research, and I think we do a pretty good job. This isn't meant to be a knock on us, but like we're not executives in an NBA front office. We have day jobs, we have lives, we have all the stuff that we have to do. Brett Brown already has 2 guys from his coaching tree that have already gone on to head coach jobs that appear to be like that were like highly sought after. We have Lloyd Pierce, and then we have Monty Williams going to Phoenix, and Lloyd Pierce in Atlanta.
Right.
So the fact that NBA franchises are valuing people that have come from Brett's tree makes me think that he's doing a pretty good job. And you have to realize, these are the 2 things that I feel like people are aware of. Number 1, if you're gonna get rid of Brett, who's coming in? Who's out there? Who's out there and available to replace him? There's nobody. Did Mark Stein's report, was that the one that included Thibodeau as a replacement, or was that just other bullshit?
I think that was other BS.
Okay, I don't think it did either, so I agree. But still, people were talking about Thibodeau being a replacement.
No.
What the fuck are you talking about? Jimmy Butler just ran away from this guy.
Yeah.
And you want Jimmy Butler to come back, and you think Thibodeau's going to be the coach?
Yeah,
Get the fuck out of here.
And who do you think, if you want to pluck a really good young college coach, like who's going to come in here and, going from coaching a bunch of 18, 19-year-olds to
college
Jimmy
coaches
Butler
are built on their recruiting, not on their basketball. And then the other thing that I had was that the player part of it is the players describe him like he's a player's coach, and we've talked about his like X's and O's, and I think he's like average, maybe slightly above. He's not this elite game plan coach. I get that, but I feel like he's done a great job with his adjustments. We talked about that before. We've seen that in both series where they've lost game 1 and come out and won game 2 and made a lot of great adjustments. I think that that's very important and that's valued.
And the one thing I haven't heard anyone talk about is that, we always talk about, Ben's going to develop a jump shot, Embiid's just going to get better. So no one ever talks about, hey, maybe the coach can, develop and get better. Like, I know he's obviously older.
I think
but
he's learned through. I think it's been proven he's learned through the years.
Absolutely.
So I think it's a very real thing. So I think we're both happy that Brett's back. I don't know who in the world you would get to replace him. I do think that this year is very important. And listen, if this year goes the same way it's been going and you still feel like they can't make that next step, then I'm definitely going to have less of an issue with it. Sure. I get it. Like, there's only so long that we can just completely defend this and get by. At some point, you almost have to make a change for the sake of making change, and I can appreciate that. I just don't think that we're there yet.
I agree. Yeah.
So, please make sure to listen to the podcast. Again, it will be available later today. Make sure a lot of the things that we talk about are further emphasized from articles on Philly Front Office. You can check out phillyfrontoffice.net for a lot of articles from great contributors. Our podcasts are featured on there as well. Make sure, again, leave us a 5-star rating, a review, and subscribe to the podcast, things like that. Follow us on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Untapped, at Process Potables. And make sure that you are subscribed to the PFO YouTube, which we'll be uploading this video to. Thank you, everybody, and cheers.
This beer's for Brett.
To Brett.